Hi guys! This will be the lecture video on Descartes' Discourse on Method. By the way, his first name is Rene, he's French, and the last name is pronounced Descartes, and you don't pronounce the S. Well, in English, we don't pronounce the S. So, anyway, whatever. He's the guy who says, I think, therefore I am. So, of course, we'll talk about that. But if you've heard that before, that's from Descartes. By the way, if you've taken, what is it trigonometry? Oh, God, now I don't remember. When I did that in high school. But when we made the X and then the little lines, and you'd plot a point on that plane, and it was like, 2 comma 5, right? 2 over and 5 up. Those are called Cartesian coordinates, and that is named after Descartes. We don't say Descartian like we say Shakespearean. We say Cartesian when it is of Descartes. And he's the one who came up with that, and we still use that. If you study the history of math or philosophy or science and you don't hear the name Descartes, your teacher has done something wrong. He's a very important man. He is touted with having begun the what's called the Age of Reason, which is the first section of the European Enlightenment, and it's due to this work, the Discourse on Method. And we're not reading the whole thing. There's a lot to it. Remember, there's an excerpt, it's short, in our book and in our readings textbook, and then I've put up a second excerpt on modules on Canvas. So you need to read that too, and we're looking at Descartes for 2 weeks, although I will only provide this one lecture video, which I believe I should be able to do in one video. We'll see. But you need to read both of those parts, and yes, it's very difficult. I know. That's why we're going over it, okay? So make sure, too, that you pay attention to the section on the Enlightenment in our main textbook. But I'll say a couple of words. If you look on the lecture notes, and I put those up in modules as well, so look at that while we're going over this. And by the way, your first paper is about Descartes, so please pay careful attention. And if you don't understand something, either write me an email, or what might be better is to put your question in the discussion. Is that what I even called it? I put up in the discussions area, there's your actual discussion questions, but then there's just one forum where you could just ask anything. And so if you don't understand the text or something that I say, or some of the arguments or something, especially given that you have to write a paper on this topic, it'd probably be best to put your question in there, in that little discussion forum that is open all the time. And it's not for your assignments, it's just for any kinds of questions that you have for the course. Be best to put it in there. And by the way, I'm not getting notifications when people are putting questions in there, which is really annoying, and I don't know why I'm not getting notifications, because I get notifications when you guys send me emails and when you upload discussion responses, but I'm not getting notifications for that forum. I don't know why. So that's probably why I'm being late to respond to those, because I'm not even thinking about checking them. So after this, I will be more diligent about checking, okay? Or you could just email me. But this way, if people put the questions in there, then you guys can look at that, and I may have answered a question that you also had. So then I don't have to answer the same question 12 times, which might be nice. And then also the other thing, and this is always important anytime you're in a classroom, sometimes people don't realize they don't understand something until somebody else asks a question about it. So you might think that you get everything, and then somebody asks a question and you say, oh, hey, yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I do need Denise to explain that. So that's also good. So, yeah, ask your questions there if possible, and maybe check it, okay? And I'll post announcements if there have been a lot of important questions that you should look at, if that happens. But anyway, let's go to the notes. So open that up, and you'll want to open up the actual excerpt from the Discourse and Method that I put on modules and under online readings, because you'll want to, I'm going to be reading quotes and things from it and pointing to paragraphs and so forth. So you'll want to be able to look at them together as I'm going through the notes. So the first thing I put in the notes is just a little bit about the Enlightenment. There's obviously a lot more in our book, so make sure you know it, because all that stuff is going to be on your exam, okay? So the Enlightenment, and I put this in because after we look at the Enlightenment, we'll be looking at the Romantic period. And the Enlightenment is populated by mathematicians, scientists, philosophers, whereas the Romantic period, then we'll see, is populated by artists, poets, and musicians. So they're both responding to very particular things that happened in the movements prior to them. They are the Enlightenment and Romanticism are very specifically backlashes, direct backlashes to the periods that preceded them. Now the Renaissance is what directly preceded the Enlightenment, and the Renaissance is a rebirth, specifically a rebirth of these classical ideas from the ancient Greeks and stuff, and so forth, humanism, those kinds of ideas. And the Renaissance is a response to the Middle Ages and a renewing of these humanistic values rather than the values held by the Middle Ages, which in many respects were regressive and cruel, and well, they were very superstitious, and they were very interested. That is, the values of the Middle Ages were very interested in maintaining strictly a concern in one's life with God, with religion / with the Catholic Church. So a lot of people broke away from the Catholic Church at that time. Obviously, we had the Protestant Reformation, and then the Counter-Reformation, which didn't counter all that much, but whatever. So the Renaissance began this move into the Enlightenment. In some ways, the Enlightenment, I think, can be considered the culmination of one aspect of the Renaissance, which is this concern with humanism, with human abilities, with what's happening in this world. So in the Enlightenment, thinkers like Descartes were no longer interested in just taking the word of an authority figure. In their time, that would have been the church, and maybe the king, but the church really had its hands in everything. So they weren't as interested in just listening to what other people had to say, but in questioning things for themselves and looking into the world and ideas for themselves. Given that we now have this interest in humanism, which was maintained, of course, throughout the Enlightenment, the belief is that I don't have to take the word of what this particular bishop or priest says it says in the Bible, what this guy says God wants me to do. I have the capacity to think through that stuff myself and to reach my own conclusions. logical ones, by the way. The Enlightenment is really defined by its use of reason, logic, when looking into important questions. I imagine that many of us have at one point in time considered our religious teachings, but we don't always consider it with a logical methodology. And Descartes, by the way, was what's called a theist. That is, he believed in God. Some people say that the reason that he maintained his theism, the reason that he goes on in this text to provide proofs for the existence of God is just because he would have been, beheaded or hanged if he had spoken out against that. I don't think so. I think that is a reduction of the person. He, having learned something about Descartes' biography, he had a very deep fear of death, among a couple of other things. And in fact, he claimed that he would find the cure for death, which obviously never occurred. But for someone who has that kind of fear, the belief in God and in an immortal soul, which Descartes believed in and argued for, provides consolation. And this is a point about his psychology, but it does appear that he legitimately held theistic beliefs, that he wasn't lying about it and just saying these things to appease the church and to save his own skin. It does look like he had a deep-seated desire to believe that there was a God and an order to the universe. So that's a point about his psychology. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's right or anything, but I think that it does mean that he has more than just political reasons to put forth these arguments. I think he really believed them. Okay, so if you ever hear anybody else say something like that in school, that he's just doing that to save his skin, he's a pretty smart guy. It's complex. The issue is always complex. So don't reduce someone who is as important as Descartes has been to that. And read his biography, and then you'll probably think differently anyway, which is precisely what Descartes would tell us. He would say, don't just listen to Denise. Don't just listen to any other teacher. Don't even just listen to a book. Go and do some research. Observe the world around you. Find out for yourself. The more you get into the habit of listening to others, the more you become a slave. And the less you use your reason. The brain is a muscle. If you don't use it, it atrophies. You can become smarter by practicing and challenging your brain. And you can stay ignorant, and your IQ will stay lower if you don't. So if you just listen to what everybody else says, you legitimately maintain a lower IQ. So go out and read and study and think, and you'll become smarter, okay? And Descartes and other thinkers in the Enlightenment felt this way too. They said we can't just listen to what everybody tells us. We've got to use this amazing gift given to us by God. So, anyway. That's that stuff. Now, the next portion that I put on the notes here is about rationalism, and I've defined it. Truth can be found by reason alone. There are usually two camps here in philosophy. Descartes is a rationalist. He was of the mind that if I just use my brain specifically to think logically, if I trace one idea correctly, assuming that there are no flaws in my reasoning, actual logical flaws, if I trace one idea to its logical end, I can come to truth if I don't make any logical mistakes. And the best way to do that is by thinking alone. He's very specific about that. Thinking in my mind alone, not bouncing ideas off of one another like Plato had it. Plato did not think that staying in your head was a great idea, that that's the way to discover truth. You needed to have a dialogue with somebody else. You needed to bounce ideas off of each other. Descartes didn't think that way. He thought that the mind alone, one guy, could come to truth on his own if he could eliminate all logical flaws from his thinking. And this is as opposed to specifically what's called the camp that's called empiricism. Empiricists think differently, that truth can be found by observing the external world, which is to say empirical data, by observing the world itself. Descartes, well, he certainly did not think that. He thought that the external world is something that can potentially blind us to truth. Okay? So we can see specifically how his rationalism plays out when we look at his arguments. Now, make sure you look at the paper topic. I've said that you not only have to explain, this is important, I'll ding you on this if you don't do it. You not only have to explain his arguments for the three things that I will talk about, you have to explain why or how one argument leads to the next argument. Okay? Why you need the first one before you can get to the second one. And as I'm going through them, I will explain exactly how that's done. So pay attention. Okay? Because you're not going to get that from the text. Descartes does not really explain, well, he says something about it, but you're probably not going to pick up on it. And he doesn't really explain it, he just says it, which is not the same thing as explaining. So, the first thing here, the first idea, his project is a particularly Enlightenment kind of project. He says, all right, I've heard, and I take for granted, a whole lot of so-called truths. One truth that I've heard is that God exists. Do I actually know why I believe that? Okay, my mom says so, and she made me go to church my whole damn life, and they say so, but do they give me any evidence for this? They just point to the Bible, but that's circular, because you have to prove, it's basically what you're saying is God says that God exists. Well, that doesn't help. I need external proof, right? This is a theist saying this, by the way. A man who actively believes in God says, I don't just want to believe because everybody's told me I'm supposed to believe, and if I don't believe, I get in big trouble. I want to believe because there's a reason to believe. I want to believe in something because it actually is true, not because people have told me it's true. Because you know what I've noticed in the world? People are full of crap. A lot. And they're stupid. And they have lots of dire motivations for telling me that certain things are true or false. And frankly, I don't know if I trust them. I don't know if I trust other people to tell me the truth about the existence of God, for crying out loud. This might be something I should look into on my own. because it's kind of important. So, there's one belief that I hold that I actually don't seem to have any evidence for. Then, I just kind of take for granted, don't I, that things exist that I experience every day, like my body, the external world, the, have anything I can grab here, lotion, right? I just seem to assume that these things exist, and I mean, I feel like I must have a good reason, because don't I experience them? But I notice that when I am sleeping and having a dream, it seems very real. Sometimes I wake up and I'm crying or I'm happy because of something that happened in the dream. And in the dream, I thought it was real. I thought I was really experiencing it. How do I know that's not just happening here too? It's just an even more vivid dream. Okay, like plug in the Matrix here, right? How do I know I'm not Neo and asleep and in the Matrix or whatever, right? It's a good image for what's going on here and in the discourse, so use that if that helps you. But that's what he's saying. Neo didn't know. He woke up and found out. How many times have I woken up from, and this has actually happened to me. I mean, I imagine it's happened to all of us. How many times have I woken up from a dream and I was disappointed that it was only a dream? It felt so real and I was so happy. I remember as a kid that used to happen to me all the time. I would have dreams that, these two dreams, it happened a lot, that it was either Christmas or my birthday. I'm a kid, right? So I wanted presents. So I woke up and it wasn't either of those. Instead, it was like my birthday's in January and Christmas is in December. I woke up and it was like August. I was like, oh. And I would legitimately be upset and disappointed. But it felt so real and I was so happy. Well, how do I know that's not happening here too? How do I know? I mean, I have a hunch it's not what's going on, but do I have any evidence? I don't seem to have any real evidence. How do I know it's not some kind of evil deceiver? I mean, since I don't have evidence that there's a God, and, you know, that God is benevolent, how do I know that there isn't some other kind of God who's an evil deceiver and who's deceiving me on purpose? I don't remember the Matrix very well, but wasn't there some, like, group specifically deceiving people? I can't remember. But what if it's like that? How do I know it's not, is the point. How do I know? And since this is the Enlightenment, and people are starting to question what they know and why they believe it, and starting to say, if I'm going to believe anything, then damn it, I better have evidence for my belief. I better figure it out logically, and if I don't have evidence, I better shed the belief so that I can take on better beliefs and thus not walk around like a moron and not think all kinds of crazy things and then behave out of those crazy thoughts and do horrible things in the world because I have a very strange idea of what God wants. So I do really despicable things on the planet because of this crazy idea that many human beings have, and they do crazy things. Instead of that, maybe I can get closer to the truth by thinking logically and not taking anything as true when other people tell me, or even when my senses tell me, because my senses are telling me, I'm looking at my arm, touching it, my senses are telling me that it's there, but what if I'm dreaming? Then my senses aren't working like that. They're not giving me truth. So, Descartes comes up with this notion of what's called radical doubt. He says, okay, here's my project. I want to find something true. I want to know what's real. I want to know if I've had the wool pulled over my eyes this whole time. I want to know if the things that I thought are true are indeed true. The only way to do that is by doubting everything that what he says admits of the slightest doubt. If there's any way for me to doubt it, just assume that it's false. That way, through process of elimination, I can get rid of all this stuff that could potentially be false, and hopefully I'll pull away all those layers and I'll find something that cannot be doubted, that is absolutely true, what he calls a self-evident proposition. Here's a self-evident proposition, but not one upon which he can base the rest of his argument. Something like, all bachelors are unmarried. That's a self-evident proposition, because if I just know what the definition of bachelor is, then it's evident from the notion of bachelor that this person, man, is unmarried. It's a self-evident proposition. I don't need to check it against the world. It's logical. If we're talking about a bachelor, we're talking about a man who is unmarried, because that's what the word means. So all I need to figure that out is just logic, I guess. I don't even think you need that. It's just self-evident. So he's looking for a truth akin to this. If I can find something that I can know without looking at the external world. Because remember, although my senses see and smell and hear the external world, how do I know I'm not dreaming? My senses seem to deceive me all the time. I constantly, and I actually do this because I'm really afraid of, well, insects and spiders, but spiders particularly. I'll feel like something on my arm, and I'll go, oh my god, it's a spider. And then, oh, it was a piece of fuzz, or a hair, or whatever. And I freak out all the time. And I'll see something move out of the corner of my eye, and I always think it's a spider, like something disgusting. And it's not. Yeah, well, sometimes it's been, and that's horrifying. But most of the time, I'm just freaking out, because I'm really afraid of spiders. So my senses, we do that all the time. We think that we heard something and nobody else did and whatever. People get auditory and visual hallucinations when they're, on a drug, or if they have a particular mental disorder or something. Those things aren't really there, but their senses tell them that those sounds or visuals are occurring, but they're not. So it looks like if I want to find something true upon which to base the rest of my beliefs about the world, I can't use my senses. Senses aren't going to give me something true, because the senses can be doubted. The senses often deceive me. They often lead me astray. So I can't use my senses to find out if something is true. But I do need to find out if something is true. So, thus far, I'm trying to get rid of everything that admits of the slightest doubt. So I get rid of sense evidence or sense testimony, eyewitness testimony, all that crap, which, by the way, is notoriously unreliable. There's a reason, because our senses deceive us all the time. I have to get rid of thinking that the body is this absolute truth, because I could be sleeping, the senses deceive me, whatever. I have to get rid of the notion of God, because I have even less evidence for that than I do for the existence of my body. I have to get rid of the belief that the external world exists because I could just be in the Matrix, right? Who knows? What am I left with? Actually, let me, before I go there, let me read in the first portion that I have there about radical doubt, doubt everything that you cannot know for certain. If you look down to the third bullet point, I put a sentence from paragraph 1. If you look at the excerpt that I put on modules, I numbered the paragraphs. So then when you write your papers, since we don't have page numbers, you can refer to these paragraph numbers and then page numbers from our readings textbook if you pull quotes out of there. And you probably should be doing both. So, let me find this. You know what I think I'll do? I didn't think about this till now. I can go and highlight in red or something in modules on the excerpt the particular quotes that I put in the notes and that I'll pull out and talk about, because I'm having trouble finding them, and that probably means you will too. So let me look here. Where? Okay, okay. Well, this is a... I can't find this at all. Okay, well, it's in here somewhere, and paragraph 1, whatever I end up highlighting, you'll see. But it starts out, I ought to reject as absolutely false all opinions in regard to which I could suppose the least ground for doubt. There's more, but of course I can't find the quote. Oh, here it is. Ha! In order to ascertain whether after that there remained aught in my belief, that there remained something in my belief that was wholly indubitable, that is, it cannot be doubted, I am rejecting everything that admits of the slightest doubt, so that I can see if at the end there's something left over that admits of no doubt. So this is the project that he undertakes. And he does it as far as he's concerned. Other philosophers after do not think that he did it, but that doesn't matter right now. Okay? Okay. This is where he is left with the self-evident proposition, I think, therefore I am. And you can see the fourth line up from the bottom of paragraph 1, the Latin, cogito ergo sum. Cogito is thinking, right? Thinking, therefore existing is the idea. I think, therefore I exist. Here's what he says. I will highlight a second quote in that paragraph. Let me find it. Okay. This is annoying, I'm really sorry. It's probably annoying me more than it's annoying you. Whilst I thus wished, this is about, well, I'll have it highlighted, but it's about 6 lines up from the bottom of paragraph 1. Whilst I thus wished to think that all was false, while I sat there thinking that God and my body and everything was false because it admits of some doubt, it was absolutely necessary that I, who thus thought, should be somewhat. The word, what he means there is something, okay? This is, first of all, it's a translation from the French, so keep that in mind. And it's not translated into contemporary English, so it makes it tough. And as I observed that this truth, I think, therefore I am, was so certain and of such evidence that no ground of doubt could be alleged by the skeptics capable of shaking it, I concluded that I might accept it as the first principle of the philosophy of which I was in search. Okay, so he actually makes an argument here. Let's see. Here's the argument. What he says in that sentence, basically, he doesn't put forth the argument in sort of a in logical steps. He just says it. So, whilst I thus wished to think that all was false, I'm sitting here thinking that my body is false, that is, doesn't exist, that the external world doesn't exist, that God doesn't exist, that my senses deceive me. I'm sitting here thinking about all of that stuff, right? So, doesn't something have to exist to do the thinking? An evil deceiver could deceive me about my body existing, but there has to be something in existence to be deceived. Right? I mean, how else? I have to exist in order to think that I do not exist. In order to question my existence, I must first be in existence. You can't question anything if you don't exist to do any questioning, right? That's his idea. So he says, while I'm sitting here thinking about the engaging in this project, that all these things are false, that God doesn't exist, that I don't exist, I realize that I'm doing something. I'm thinking, I'm doubting, I'm questioning. Something is in existence if those things are happening. And that something is specifically the mind. By the way, understand, mind and brain are not the same thing. Brain is part of the body. Brain is something I can see and touch. Mind, well, we don't know exactly what the mind is, and if you want to learn more about that, feel free to take the philosophy of mind and study things like neuroscience, and try to come to understand what consciousness is. Because we don't know that now, and maybe we never will, but Descartes doesn't use the word consciousness. He uses the word mind, and he uses it synonymously with the word soul. But don't worry about like religious dealings with that. It doesn't matter right now. But our term that we usually think of is consciousness. Other animals and insects and things seem to have brains, but they don't all. Some of them do not appear to exhibit consciousness. So it looks like something like mind or consciousness has arisen somehow from the brain, but they're not the same thing. These are some ideas that are tossed around now in philosophy of mind. But we don't know, and, well, when Descartes spoke about it, though, he meant something like consciousness, okay? So make sure you understand that. So, at the very least, what I know for certain, through logic alone, you'll notice this, logic alone, if I'm thinking about thinking or existing, something must exist to do the thinking. That's just logic. That just follows logically. So that's the first thing. That's his first principles. He says, I have pushed away all these things that seem false, and I've uncovered one thing that I cannot doubt, that my mind exists. And cogito, the word cogito is often used to describe or name Descartes' notion of mind, and it means specifically thinking thing, okay? That which thinks, and it doesn't mean the brain, so understand that. The brain is what's called res extensa, extended thing. That means thing that is extended in space, which means takes up space, has mass. Okay? The mind or consciousness is immaterial, intangible. It does not take up space anywhere. It's like love. I mean, if you want to think of love as something more than chemicals in my brain, and you might not want to think of it like that, but let's just assume love doesn't take up space, okay? It's immaterial. Or hatred. I'm going to stop the video here so I can upload this one, and then I'll make a second one. I knew I wouldn't be able to do it in one video. Why do I think that?